All right, so we are back for a brand new episode. Got Father Patrick join us again. How are you, Father?
Glory to God, I am well. How are you?
Doing good. All right, so
Yeah.
it's been a couple of weeks since we did a show, so
Yes, it's good to
it's
be
good.
able to get
Yeah,
back again.
yeah. Tonight's subject will be on the essence energy distinction, theology of St. Gregory Palamas, comparing it to Thomas Aquinas, I guess. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so this video is by Scholastic Answers, and it's the Cappadocians destroy J. Dyer. So that'll be the video that we'll be reviewing today. So let's pull it up. All right, so there's a bunch of timestamps that you gave me here. So we're just going to freeze on each one so you can,
Right.
yeah.
So this first one is a matter of discussing divine simplicity, which we agree it has no composition. What that means is that God is not made up of parts which exist in themselves, because that would imply that the parts exist prior to himself of his own composition. And therefore, they would be God. The parts would be God themselves. And it also implies that things can exist which have limits in time and space. In fact, it could be a bit of this and a bit of that. So God is simple in the sense he's not made up of parts which can be separated out into their own self-existing bits that float around. And yeah, so that's the main part of divine simplicity. So he's not able to be separated out into separate bits. That would include he's not made up of bits which are limited in scope of his constitution. He's the same throughout all his being. He's not a bit over here with one thing and a bit over there another thing. So this is what we mean by simple. Right. But we don't necessarily mean that something that is simple in the sense of unitariness. And in other words, simplicity can also be expressed through what is infinite. And something that is infinite can also, in a sense, be simple. So we just got to keep that in mind as well. Right. Then composition is a union of things that are really distinct. Now, when he's using really distinct here, this is one of the key points is trying to define this. Now, a common way of talking about real distinction is the distinction of things which are truly separable. In other words, parts. So composition, when you define really real distinctions, yes, things are composed of separable bits. There is a union of those bits, so they are apart from each other. However, we can also speak of a real distinction in other ways. So I was looking through, some people like to talk about an exclusion principle, and they can talk about the distinction between the essence of something and its being. And you could argue that something has an essence but doesn't have a being. And because something could have an essence and a being, and something could have an essence and not be, therefore the to be aspect of the thing must be distinct from the essence per se, because you can have this essence in one thing without this, and essence in something else with that. So that is a type of exclusion of real distinction there. The essence and the property to be is really is a real distinction of a form there, but they're not separable. To be cannot be separated from the essence. You can't have something being which is not of essence. So it's united to the essence. It's part of the essence in a sense, or a property of essence as such, but it is a distinct property. Now, that type of real distinction is what the Orthodox will be starting to talk about, is where something like that, where the property is not separable from the essence to exist by itself, but we can talk about a type of real distinction. So in other words, some people talk about a major real distinction, which is separable, and a minor real distinction, which is like a property of a person sitting in a chair. You can distinguish the person from their sitting. And so they can still be a person if they're not sitting, but the sitting doesn't exist without the person. You can't have just a sitting happening without somebody sitting. And again, this is a type of when we talk about a distinction in Orthodoxy, we're talking about this level of minor real distinction or modal distinction, but of course slightly qualified. And then some people talk about a virtual distinction, but I think, and this is also can be what we're using vaguely in our terms of distinction. But Orthodox are not speaking of essence and energies as really distinct as separable parts. That is not the doctrine of the Orthodox Church.
Right. Would you say it's similar to a formal distinction?
Some people do talk about formal distinctions. I think that's probably not quite strong enough for what the Orthodox want to say. But yeah, some of these categories are developed outside the Orthodox sense. We might even have to define a new specific category. But I think something like the minor real distinction or modal distinction is probably close enough for us. And we can sometimes talk about in terms of virtual distinction. And sometimes we can use formal distinction. But yeah, all these things have a variety of how they're defined. But I just wanted to make clear that when we talk about something being really distinct in Orthodox, we're not talking about the major real distinction where things are separable from each other and can exist of their own, realizable independently of each other. No, that is not what we're talking about.
Yeah, and as far as these distinctions, I mean, even the Roman Catholics, I mean, there's multiple schools on this, right? Like as far as what kind of distinctions.
Yes. But some people, when they criticize Orthodox as saying real distinction, then they assume that means separable parts. No, that's not what we're talking about. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Right. All right, let's go to the next.
So in answer to this question, we basically, there is no problem because we're not talking about any composition here.
Right.
Yes. Now, when he's going through there, he's talking about the logoi as distinct from one another, but not just simply names. So just simply names is I can have 5 names for the same thing, and all pointing to the same reality. So in English, we quite often have names for the same thing. I'm just trying to, off the top of my head, think of one which I am probably failing to do so very cool. But we could talk about a lamp and a light. And both of us were speaking about the same thing, the object on the table, which is shining a light on us. We could call it a light and a lamp. It's pointing to exactly the same thing. And what they're saying, Thomas is saying here, is that the names, when we say God is love, but God is merciful, we're not pointing to exactly the same thing. We're not saying that love is exactly the same as mercy. And that there is a real something about God which is really applies to love, and one that really applies to mercy that is truly grounded in God. So that's basically, he's trying to say that St. Thomas holds this view, but later I find himself starting to get a little contradictory in how he's expressing this. But this is, I think, pretty much we sort of agree with this. Because Eunomius was trying to collapse everything into the great simplicity and get rid of all names. So he's taking the unity of God to an absolute sense, an absolute divine simplicity, an absolute sense. And even I wouldn't say Tinto, Aquinas is arguing against such a thing, and so does St. Basil and St. Gregory, as we'll see later.
Okay, but there is a difference between divine simplicity and absolute divine simplicity, right?
We can make that distinction, yes. And I think we could even push it a little further and talk about a eunomian divine simplicity, which would be more absolute than what some Roman Catholics might speak of as absolute divine simplicity. So I think even then, what they're discussing is not the type of the complete divine simplicity as you get it eunomius.
Okay.
If you were, you'd deny the Trinity if you had an absolute sense. You deny the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Right. Again, this is just reinforcing the bit where I was talking about there's an actual thing that's true about God to which the names apply. And he's saying that both Basil and Aquinas are affirming that. So the mercy is not exactly the same as love, is not exactly the same as judgment, is not exactly the same as patience. Yeah, again, this is just reinforcing that all the names do not carry the same meaning as one another. For light signifies one thing, vines another, way another, and shepherd yet another. Though our Lord is one in substrate and one substance, simple and not composite, he calls himself by different names at different times, using designations that differ from one another for different conceptualizations. So again, just pointing out the names have a different conceptual thing, and that this does not mean that he is not simple in substance and composite. He's not made up of these things as parts. And we'll see it later on, explain a bit more what's going on here. But yeah, he's just reaffirming that there is something real about the names and not just, so Mr. to say all the names is irrelevant. You just flash around, but there's all pointing to exactly the same simple object, absolute simple object. And St. Basil saying, no, the names do have different meanings. They are pointing to something different. But this pointing doesn't undermine the Lord is one in substance and simple and not composite, according to substance.
Okay. Here's the next section.
Yeah, again, just reinforcing again that the divine attributes are not mere polynymous. Different names are exactly the same thing. That's all that's therefore that while attributes are the same in reality, they remain distinct in their ratio conceptual account. It claims that ontological identity. I'm not quite sure what he's trying to say here. That I think that Basil's probably, this is getting a little difficult. The same in the reality. What does he mean by that? Does he mean that the actual God's love is exactly the same as his light, and there is some sort of conceptual thing in the human which is distinguishing between them, but in fact, which is pretty much like a polynym. So I'm not sure of the second point, how to take that, but it's pointing to the same essence, the same being. If that's what he means, yes, and definitely it's pointing to the same being. And that the light and his love are things which we can have genuinely distinct conceptions about these things. But the light is not exactly the same as love in God, in himself either. They don't merge into them. They are distinct realities in this of form in God.
Okay.
Yes. So what we are speaking about is, when you see energies, by the way, we are talking about operations. We're talking about the activities of God, the things that he does. Now, energy does carry a sense of power with it as well, just like in English sense of energy, we're speaking more about a power. But in Greek, the actual word is focused on the activities of God. So when we're talking about the concepts of God. We're actually talking about the activities of God, including the example, the activity of being, the S, as some people talk about, as distinct from the essence, that I am in actuality rather than in not being in actuality, is in a sense an activity as well. So love is his activity, the light, but it also attributes of things like light. We can sort of speak about energia. The light is a type of activity, but it's also a type of state as well. He's just light. He's just love. So it's not that when he creates, he doesn't action per se. He is in the state of love, but there is a sort of relationship, active expression. Love is causing a relationship expression to someone else, another hypostasis, or to us. We experience light in a distinct way. So these activities, these states, are things that relate to someone beyond God in a sense. So they are relatable. So that's what we would start talking about, the energy, covering a whole range of these things, sort of including some sort of attributes and stuff. But I'm not going to be very definite on this. There can be some scope for different arguments and stuff, but I'm just sort of putting the general framework of which we can speak about without trying to get too specific on this. And yes, now this is, I might as well talk about this a little bit now. God receives different names according to his diverse energies and his relations to objects of his benefaction. And he says this corresponds to the medieval scholastic notion of attributes with a remote foundation and causality, attributes named from God's effects. Now, this is where we start seeing that the things are not actually matching up. There is a sort of closeness to them, but they're not quite matching up. So in the Orthodox point of view, as far as I understand it, these things are not easy to get grasped. When we talk about God in himself, according to Dionysius, he's infinite. And in a sense, his energies are, because they are all complete, perfect, and in a sense infinite in themselves, we cannot pull them apart or distinguish them looking at God in of himself in their perfect unity. And a way of describing that, if I had infinite mice in infinite locations, and I put infinite cats in the same infinite locations, and infinite dogs in infinite locations, and infinite water in the infinite locations, everywhere I look, it would just be cat, dog, mouse, and water all together, all merged up in some way there. I wouldn't be able to distinguish them out because it would just be this complete reality of water everywhere, mouse everywhere, cat everywhere, dog everywhere. And they'd all be in the same place at the same time. I wouldn't be able to pull them apart as some sort of conceptual way. I just see them as one infinite whole. And we put everything there, it simply becomes one, because there's no distinction between this part or that part. That everywhere is just all the same thing. I wouldn't be able to start seeing the different bits and pieces. So this is the sense what we mean by simplicity is in the infinite way. Everything is everywhere, and I can't pull apart. Now, what we speak about is when God acts vis-a-vis creation, he diversifies his activities. So when it comes to acting to us, his activities become distinct because we are distinct. We are limited. So some of his infinite activity starts to be drawn out into sort of subcategories applied to us in a particular thing. So he shows mercy. He shows love for here. At one moment we see his light. In himself, these are all, in a sense, fully united in a sense, as I said, known as one thing. But when he, by his will, he diversifies it, we start to, from our perspective, pull these out as different things. But they're all true of God. They all exist in God. They're all founded in God. They'll come from God. We're experiencing God in his activities. And the fullness of God is everything, but they're diversified to us in his relations to us. Is what it means, the diversity and his relations to objects, to us. And when we give different names to God through our experience of the different activities through him, but in his simple essence, we can't actually name that because we don't actually have contact with that. The only things we name are things that we contact to in relationship to us. And as I said, he diversifies that. Just as we are all created, the universe is created as a diversification of the infinite reality in himself, the diversification of the fullness of reality in the Logos, the word, and we have multiple loci, which we talk about the ratio, the understanding of the principles of everything, are all the diversification of the full infinite reality in God himself. Of course, expressed in things of a different essence, created out of ex nihilo, out of nothing. Now, so when we talk about diversity of energy, we're actually talking about engaging with God's operation. He actually affects us. We are being engaged with directly by God. We are experiencing God through his activities, through his energies, so to speak. Whereas the scholastic thing is starting to talk about God's effects. In other words, he is talking about, they seem to be shifting into something which God creates. We experience a created life, a created love, a created mercy, a created warmth, a created kindness. That it's not, though it's grounded in God in some ways, what we actually experience is uncreated. And so this is where we start to distinguish, have different ideas here, but he's not really speaking about that. The idea of the created things, with created effects, is still sort of grounded in the same sort of idea of connection to what's true in God and a sort of diversification of that. But how that diversification is expressed and engaged by us is different conceptually, and he's not really addressing this. And that is actually quite important to the whole essence, the debate, and he's not really quite bringing that out here.
Right. So the scholastic view would be that grace is created, right?
Well, yeah. Again, I can't speak exactly for all different schools of thought which happen in Roman Catholicism. That is a common way of speaking about it, and one thing which we reject as such. But I'm loath to speak too generally about it because Roman Catholics have many different schools, many different nuances and everything like that. But the classic way it's put out is, yes, that somehow the thing is actually created, but we experience in this created world. And we're as such, we're not actually engaging with God, and at least in this life. And you'll see this later on. He starts making this talks, there's distinctions either as well. So anyway, that is something which is lurking a bit behind his so-called same ideas here.
Okay.
It's done through mode of causality in two ways. Either insofar as produces which is created, such thing that God is called good, because he pours goodness into created things. Insofar he relates to us according to a mode of... Yeah, this is just reinforcing that bit where I was speaking about the moving to created grace, created modes of being. This is not the same as what Basil's saying, and this is where the debate is. And he's sort of just brushing over this part.
Okay.
It does not, well, again, what does he mean by real distinction here? Where if you are talking about some sort of modal distinction or minor real distinction or exclusion, thing like the sitting is distinct from the person sitting, so God's light, which we experience, is distinct from God himself. God is light. He is not to be reduced to light. And whether we see or participate doesn't mean we cannot or are not participating in God in some way. So I don't think Basil is denying some form of real distinction. But again, really depends what we mean. He does deny that the energies are separable from the essence and can exist of themselves. Yeah, that is denied. Position of divine simplicity, yes, and Basil is reinforcing divine simplicity, holds that God is not composite. That is a tenet of Orthodox belief. That the energies or whatever are not separable little things that are composite, because they're not limited things in themselves in their eternal form. That is why we'll see this a little bit more later. That's why I made that point earlier. Only in their diversification to us do they have a sense of a limit because of us. And only in that sense, where we can sometimes people talk about energies beginning and ending, that is according to their diversification. But diversification has a beginning and the diversification has an end. Some of the energies which are sort of diversified to us have a continual thing because we are creatures. God always engages a creature. So there's a certain activity which is appropriate between God and creature, which will began when he created and will continue ever because we will continue as a creation. There will some activities like judgment, which will have a beginning and an end. They will not keep judging. Once a judgment is given, it's final. So there are things that we can talk about, but only according to their relation to us as diversified, not according to their eternal state. They don't have a beginning and end in that way there. And because they're infinite, we'll see a little bit later on, in themselves, then they do not cause composition. Both attributes to the form of causality conception, not ontological decision. Again, it's very difficult conceptual. Where do you just conceptual from our perspective? God is concept in a sense. God is mind. God is. We can speak of that. So he's pure concept in a sense. So how does that? Because he's pure spirit. That when if it's just simply concept, it's still real in God and still ontological in God. We need to define these terms a lot more. It does seem to be trying to push out that something he's going to argue it's just something in our minds, but that would be a little contradictory to the polynym argument he was making. So I'm not quite sure what he's saying there and what does he mean by remote foundation in causality, except he's saying that God causes the thing by some sort of creation and he's the cause of it through some of his will. And therefore is a reality of it in the cause and in the creation of it. Yes, perhaps, but not in God in himself. Yeah, again, I don't really quite know what he's fully trying to say here. He doesn't really draw it out when he speaks either.
Okay. So would you say that St. Gregory Palamas himself did not believe in a real distinction between the essence and energies? I mean, in the strictest sense that you're talking about.
Yeah, no. Orthodox deny any sense that the activities of God can exist apart from his essence. And St. Gregory is quite clear on this, and so is St. Basil and everyone. Just as I said, my sitting here in this chair has absolutely no meaning apart from myself being here and sitting in the chair. I can't walk away and you can visualize the sitting continuing in the chair, separate of me being in the chair. That is meaningless. This is the same with all the activities of God, the operation. That's why I use activity and operation. There's no meaning of God's operation without God operating. That would be nonsense. So that's why we are not speaking about these operations as things that sort of exist in themselves, partial things. That are all lumped together God as partial things. That is no. We of course we don't believe that, but we do believe that the activities are truly, in a sense, or really distinct from that. So as I said, speaking of some sort of real distinction in an exclusion way, as I talk about sitting and me, the distinction between that or my being and not being, but according to essence, we can distinguish those things. So, or the mind, that's the other one was a minor real distinction. Yeah, at that level, that's what we're talking about. If we're using the definitions I picked up online, but there's a whole range of ways these are defined. So it's very hard when you start talking about using the words real distinction. So Gregory has a distinction, but not the real separable distinction where the things are realizable of themselves apart from the other. No, but the activities cannot be realized without the essence.
Right, right. So in that sense, we couldn't even say that there's a real distinction within the Trinity itself. Then,
yeah, that's right. The three hypostases themselves cannot exist separated from each other. They're not separable either, in that sense. So they're not parts of God. They don't exist in a separable manner.
right. All right, let's go to the next section.
Yeah. So between the three hypostases, there's a level of opposition, for want of a better word, of one not being like the other, which is beyond what we're talking about with the activities, in a sense. So there is the manner in which they exist is quite unique, and that uniqueness is something which we're not applying to the activities as such.
Right. Okay, here's the next
other
quote.
Than the uniqueness applies to the activities of the same activity at each hypostasis. So yeah, it does. The activity is affected by the unique manner of existence of each of the hypostases, but the activities are common to all. And we're not making in the Father. I'm not pulling out the activities and making sort of this one's opposite that one and stuff like that, and creating more hypostases of it. No, we're not doing that. Right. Okay. Yes. So this is where I was talking about God is life as a whole, light as a whole, good as a whole. So in other words, each of it, while the life is distinct from the light and from good, God as a whole is good, whole is life. So we can't sort of start finding life in one corner of God over here and in a bit of good over here and a bit of light over here. The light is all God, is all light. God is light. We can't sort of find a bit which is not light. We can't find a bit which is not love. It's all love. And because each, by distinct from each other, again, as we experience it, but still truly in God in an infinite way, they are not composite because they're not parts. They're not separable from each other because we can't distinguish a bit that's over here or there. I can't sort of draw lines between it. I can't rip these things into pieces. That all of God is light. Therefore, if I take the light away, I take away God away. It's not something which I can exists in the bits on itself. That's why it's not composed of these things, because he's all of each thing, even in the distinction of each thing, which is sort of hard to grasp. But it's all these things. As I said, the best I can get is like having an infinite number of mice, cats, dogs, and everything everywhere, every section, an infinite number of space. So in other words, everything is full up. You suddenly lose any ability to distinguish between any of these things. Yet that each of them is actually a distinct thing, which is infinitely everywhere. So that's the best way I can sort of help try to conceptualize what might be going on here. It's a play of infinities and how they work.
Right. So would you say that all of God's energies, even though distinct, they all come together as one divine energy, right?
In a sense, yeah, it is in the infinity of everything. It becomes one in God in himself in his eternal state. But when he interacts with us, they can be separated out because it's infinite. They can be sort of distinguished out from each other, and they're still truly what's from God and of God and stuff. They're not something created. It is distinguishing in that and diversifying is the best word. What is truly in himself, but diversity in a sense is in himself. But in himself, normally it's because of the infiniteness of these things. It is effectively one operation, one activity. It's only becomes multiple in its diversification to us. But nevertheless, everything that's diversified is truly a sort of subset of the infinite reality which is in God. Yes, I can also add that another analogy is looking at light, for example. So if we have a light, we see white light. But if I put it through a prism, I see it diversify into all the different colors of the light once I put it through the prism. But when I just see them all together in the white light, I just simply see a simple white light. Yet all the parts of blue, all the colors are actually there combining together to give you the simple white light. But we can't pull them apart just looking at the white light until we have something like a prism where it then diversifies them into the separate colors. And then we bring them all back together, they all become sort of, in a sense, one. So that's an analogy. It's not necessarily perfect, but it's something along the line of how we can understand this.
Okay, let's go to the next section.
Yeah, again, just reinforcing this, that God is in each of his attributes wholly and completely, not as parts, that is a whole of divine essence. And so when God acts towards us, when he loves us, it's the fullness of God loving us. It's not like a bit of God. You can't pull bits about, there's a little bit of my essence coming over here. Well, it's simple. It's any part is a fullness of the same as every other part. So the wholeness that in each part, if there was a part or any diverse things, the wholeness of God is present there, because you can't pull that the essence out of that. You can't separate out. So the whole essence is present in every activity. Though the activity itself, as we experience it, is limited. It has a specific context, a specific limit of what we experience. Light as distinct from love, distinct from the judgment. But in that activity, there's still the simplicity of God, and we're truly experiencing the fullness of God is wholly present in the activity. It's only being, as far as we're concerned, it is being diversified and distinguished and narrowed down in a little bit, but doesn't make it any less the fullness of reality of God being present in the activity. So that's what we teach about the activities, yes.
Okay.
Yes. What we're speaking here is we know of God, his power, wisdom, goodness. These are his activities, the things that he does. Even God itself is a name pointing to activity. It's talking about a being of power and of authority over everything, supervision of all created things. And so we experience God and we name God according to his activities, what he does, how he engages with us, how we experience him. Just as I engage with anybody by how I interrelate to them, how I act with them, how they act to me, which is why we can sometimes speak of a person as a thief. Now, he is a thief, we can say that, because he steals things. Now, by his essence as a human being, he doesn't have to steal things. Stealing is not part of his essence. He could not be a thief. But nevertheless, we call him he is a thief because of his consistent activity of stealing things. So we do start to name people according to their activities. Yet we would still at the same time distinguish the activity from the person, that he could stop being a thief and stop stealing things, and then stop being a thief. He could become a generous person, someone who is generous afterwards. So, but we have a tendency to name people and define them who they are by their activities. And it's the same with God here. The essence is something we claim you cannot know. And for us, the only way you can know the essence is to be the thing itself. The essence is the core of the being of the thing, and knowing the essence is being the thing. So only God, as the infinite, eternal, uncreated God, can know his own essence as that. we are of a different nature. We are creatures. It is impossible for us to experience or know, according to essence, what it is to be uncreated. How we are created. If I was to know experience uncreated, then I would be uncreated. Therefore, I would be God. I can experience God's infinite activities, stabilities, all the attributes of what it is to be the uncreated God, as far as I am able as a creature. But I can't experience uncreatedness because I am created of the core of my being. So this is why we can't know the very essence of something, because I'd have to be the thing itself. And if we were actually God, we would cease to be creatures, we'd cease to be each other individuals. This would be more like a Platonic or a Buddhist idea, where you simply collapse into the thing. You become the thing itself. You lose any ego. You lose any distinction from the thing. You just become the thing, or you collapse back into what's distinguishing you out from the one. You just fall, but lose all that and just collapse back into it, because you're just really what you are as far as they're concerned. But for us, no, we cannot experience the essence because we're simply not that thing, and then that's impossible. So that's what we're meaning when we're speaking of that, because we have a distinction between the essence and the activities. It's impossible. It's just simply impossible to know the essence. Yeah, there's just no meaning towards it other than being the thing itself. So that's what he's talking about here. But we can. I can talk about a tree. I can't be a tree, so I don't know what it is to be a tree unless I am a tree. But I can know lots about it. I can know its height, size, how long it grows, its width, etc. I can do tests and sort of mimic its swaying in the wind and sort of getting the sort of experiential level, a little bit of what it's like to be a tree and participating in the growth of a tree and sitting on it and things like that, sensing its height. But I can't be a tree without ceasing to be a human. Sort of we can name something after their activity or their attribute, but that's not to say that the essence of a thing is that activity or that attribute. We don't collapse them into it. We're not saying love is God in that way. So yes, we definitely do that.
Okay.
Now, so here we have you cannot know Basil's. You cannot know his essence. Now Aquinas is saying cannot know his essence qualified in this life, as he really is in himself. But we can only know him according to the creatures we're seeing here. So again, this is this distinction of knowing the essence. But there is a sense here of somehow we can know the essence, but not in this life, and that we only know him according to creatures, not according to his actual activities, which we're actually engaging with. So this is quite a different conceptuality going on here. And he's sort of blurring them without making much. He's sort of saying, oh, they're saying the same thing. No, they're not. And he's not really pulling this out.
So would they say that we would know God in his essence after this life?
Well, that's what the implication is. Yes, there is. Though it is slightly qualified later on, but yes, that is what they're saying.
Yeah, so that'd be the beatific vision, right?
Yes. But we can talk about the beatific vision too, but we're not exactly meaning the same thing when we're saying that. But no, they do talk about we can know his essence. I think it's just sort of like they've sort of blurred the essence and energies together and sort of a little bit of confusion here. But of course, we can also know God through his creatures. I can contemplate the creatures and know things about God because we are the diversification of the infinite reality of himself in the principles of each one of us. So I can sort of know about God in the creatures as well. I'm not saying we don't do that, but we can also know God directly through participating in his actions working on us, and we can definitely know God in that manner. That's just basically repeating what what I've said, and that there is distinction between the essence and the energies of the activities the operations which we experience, doesn't compound God, because each of the operations, in a sense, all of God is present in each one. God is all these things, though that they're not parts and bits that exist of themselves. So they don't compound God as such. Just as my seating doesn't compound me any more than my walking compounds me.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I just pointed out there's a shift to this idea of effects, not operations, but effects. And so, again, it's this idea of his created effects. It doesn't say it explicitly, but you can see just a shift in language. So there's a sort of a parallel, but they're not actually saying the same thing. And this has not been, Wagner is not pulling this out in this video. That there is actually quite a bit of difference between what was being said between each one of these.
So what is the difference that he's saying here?
Oh, just all I'm looking out in this one is he's using the word "we know from his effects," not his operations, but his effects, not his attributes, but his effects. That's opening the way to talking about the created effects, rather than actually knowing God in his operations directly, actually experiencing God's love directly, his patience directly, his light directly as a table. It becomes a created effect, which we are engaging, not the actual light of God himself. Whereas we say, no, we're actually experiencing the light of God himself. But that's because we have been enabled to see that. It is not. So we are transformed. So it's rather than the light being made in a form which, according to our created thing that we create, acts as a created light, we ourselves are being spiritualized in the sense to engage with the spiritual light that is coming from God. So we are able to see it by the grace of the Spirit according to the spiritual means. So this is a transformation of us, not God suddenly making us more like God, towards theosis, to union of God, where we can actually truly participate in God and become God, in a sense, according to his activities. And that means there's a real connection between them, and a real interface where we can actually engage with those. And that's because we are God's transforming us. So when the three disciples went up the mountain, it's their eyes were opened, they were illumined, to be able to see the light. Not that the light was suddenly just become created, which everybody standing around could see from miles away. No, it's something that they could see because of what happened to them.
Right. So the difference would be, what they would be saying is that the creative effects is what we would call the divine energies.
Yes, we would talk about them as being the divine energies. I would talk about them as creative effects. Yeah. In general, again, I say it loosely because someone can pull out, no, we don't exactly mean exactly the same thing. Okay, but overall, in his video, he's equating basically that our sort of divine activities / energies, which we call them, but in Greek, energy is just the transliteration of Greek. It's operations, is a standard English word. We translate in works, etc. And when you translate the Greek into English, the word energia is right through all the scriptures. It just means operations and works. That's how it's commonly translated. So we experience it from his operations, and he's using the word effects. So this is where we're starting to see it's a different use of word. And he's saying that means the same thing, but it's not. Yeah, again, so essence energies. There's not a real ontological division in God. Again, I'm assuming he's talking about a division of a separable different realities. Yes, of course, we agree with that. But then he starts going, the difference between God and himself, unknowable in this life. Again, he's trying to speak about it in this life. And God is known through his effects revealed in creation. No, this is not exactly what we mean by the fathers mean by essence and energies distinction. He's blurring the things there. God is not knowable in himself, full stop, because as I said, you have to be God to know his essence. And then in his effects, no, we're talking about actual experience of God's operations. We are known through his operations and his attributes and his operations. These things are covered in the wider sense of energia. So, essence and operations distinction is what we're talking about. We know not his effects revealed in creation, but his actual operations, which we experience. And that is not, so the fathers are not teaching what St. Thomas is teaching here. And he hasn't addressed this. He's just assuming that, yes, there's a sort of a parallel to what's going on. But it's not the same thing.
Okay. So is he saying that the teaching of St. Gregory Palamas is that there is a real ontological division in God?
Well, he's not actually stating that specifically, so I'm not going to start guessing what he's going to say about St. Gregory unless he actually makes a statement. But it's talking about the Jedias and things, and when some of our Orthodox apologetics start speaking about real essence and energies, they use the word energies instead of operations because it sounds something different from operations, which is throughout the scriptures and throughout the patristic text or the Sixth Ecumenical Council. That's clear, the distinction between nature, will, and operation. They make that distinction constantly through because that's why we talk about two wills and two natures in Christ, precisely because they are distinct. That's what the whole debate was. That they could say he had this two natures, but not two operations. And they say, no, of course, the operations belong to the nature. If there would be no argument in Sixth Ecumenical if that distinction wasn't actually assumed. They would have just said, oh no, there's no distinction between the nature and the operation. So what are we talking about? So he's pulling out that and applying the word real distinction as if it means separable things which therefore compound. They're just assuming that that we talk about a real distinction when we talk about a really distinct as a separable real distinction, as a major real distinction. And no, it's not what we're talking about. So, but you can see here, again, no one throws a pig. What does that mean exactly? Is that the thing that he's created, or his operations as the divine operations? Therefore, you are experiencing God an uncreated sense of his operation, because that operation is uncreated. Even if it's diversified, the operation is a diversification of the uncreated operations, of his infinite operations. It's his actual operation, diverse operation. It's not something he's created that like a wind, and we feel a wind pushing us, and therefore I feel God pushing me because I felt a physical wind pushing me. No. If God pushed me, I would experience God actually pushing me through his own power to push. And be God himself actually pushing me with his own power.
Right.
He, by the way, does start trying to draw out this argument about the things I was making, but I've skipped over it because it's just simply stating it. There's not much more to add. Right.
Yeah.
Now here, we're talking about in the age to come. And he's pulling out a distinction between comprehensive knowledge, grasping the essence fully, impossible for creatures, and non-comprehensive knowledge, truly knowing something of God's essence without comprehending it exhaustively, especially in the beatific vision. Well, this is problematic. Firstly, the essence is simple. Either you grasp or you don't. You can't have a partial grasp of the essence if you could grasp it. Well, what does that mean? Either you have grasped the essence or you haven't grasped the essence. If you can start saying I've got a partial part of it, then the essence has some form of part which you can grasp and not the rest of it. So this actually doesn't work. And as I said, you have to be the thing. But because it's simple. Now, on the activities, the activities are infinite, and we speak the same thing. we don't actually know God's love in its complete and infinite sense because we are limited. So even when we become like God and participate in God's love and know God through his love, we still have a limit on the fact that we can move into the infinite reality of his love and experience it, but it takes us an infinite amount of time to experience infinite love of that. So we never ever fully grasp the infiniteness of his love, though we may continue to go from glory to glory in the eternity, experience it more and more deeply. But we'll never ever fully grasp the activity because it is infinite and we start as limited creatures. But because the activity is something that can be, in a sense, diversified, we can engage at least with a part of it. In its diversified sense, we can actually truly engage with it, even if we don't fully get it. But the essence, no, you can't grasp part of the essence because the activity, as I said, can be in a diversified sense. And because we participate in it, we can participate as far as we're able to participate. But the essence, either you are it or you're not it, or if you're trying to, because it's simple, grab it, completely simple, then you can't grasp part of it. It's all or nothing. I think what they're really talking about here is a bit of a fudge over where they're talking about knowing God through his activities and attributes and things. This is exactly what we're talking about. And that they're sort of lumping them together rather than making the distinction at the right place. Well, again, it's the same thing again, knowing versus comprehending. Yes, we can make the same distinction, but we apply that to the activities. And even in these activities, we can't grasp them fully. As I said, when I try to explain what the infinite activity like, you cannot actually conceptualize that. We don't have ability. We can only conceptualize things which are divided and distinct, etc., and pulled out. The infinite idea of that's why when we have contemplated the monks, you actually still your reasoning facilities, which only work on this dividing things and distinguishing things. That's exactly what the reasoning process is about, and have to sit in a certain stillness of that part of you, so you can sort of comprehend the even God in the activities and the sort of towards the infinite way. But then you cannot describe that as beyond comprehension because it's not in the thing which is the visual part where you can start pulling it apart, and so it's just something you experience. So, yes, that is the distinction which we hold according to as activities, yes. And, yes, we do realize that in this life, because of the constraints of our fallen nature, though some saints can start to attain a certain level of experience of God, the fullness of it is only in the resurrected body, the spiritualized resurrected body, which is so what is sown in one form is raised again in a different form that is capable of the full expression of the participation in God's glory, just as Christ's actual ascended body or resurrected body could. So in a sense, Christ emptied himself vis-a-vis his flesh was on earth, but in his resurrection, he's no longer limited in time and space as he was when he was walking around. Now, his body still has physical realities to it. It's not something I'm just spiritual. There's a physicality to it that exists, but that physicality is in a way which, again, I can't tell you about because unless you experience it by the resurrection, because it's not something that we are living in or experiencing now or seeing other things experiencing. So that is all I can say in that. Yes, we agree with these distinctions, but we're not talking about a vision of the essence. No. And we are talking about vision of the essence as we wanted to. We are talking about some activity or attribute of the essence, which we're engaging, not actually engaging with the essence in its naked form. Again, you can't. You have to be God to experience that. And it's experiential rather than observable or knowable. It's not something that's attributed to knowing. It is something that is a case of being.
Right. So even in heaven, we can only experience God through his energies.
Yes. We just do it at a much more complete, and potentially towards the infinite reality of experiencing that. But we always move towards that. So it's not like we only ever stop at a partial realization. We always move towards an infinite realization, but we're always infinitely moving towards the infinite realization. We never actually get to an end of growing into knowing God and realizing the infinite, because we start at a limited point. We can never exhaust our growing and going from glory to glory in God, because he is infinite. It's beyond sort of grasp at one moment, in a sense, where there is no time, in a sense, but our relative experiential understanding of God is constantly moving into an infinite understanding while never reaching it. It's just a way of what it is being infinite, and starting from a limited point of view, getting towards the infinite.
Okay.
Whereas at the present time, in our present bodies, we do have a hard stop of how far we can actually experience that. We have a real limits on that. So our ability to progress is hard stopped by the depth of a body, the limits of the physical, real boundaries of our limits, which are transcended in the age to come.
Okay.
Names are not saying something. So now he's starting to talk about the names are a product of a reason and psychological process. The names do not signify something existing independent of our minds and God himself. Well, at the start, he's talking about the ratios of something that's actually in God himself. Now he's starting to talk about these as synonyms. So I'm not quite sure what he's doing here. So the names do point to something that actually is true about God and himself. Though the names are only we can only place the names due to the versification, due to his activity with us. Nevertheless, we are truly engaging with God in a diverse way, and that is truly what is about God. And the name does truly point to something that exists in God himself, in a sense, as it is diversified to us. So I'm just going to quick. Yeah, again, it's just some people accuse energies because we say they start and stop and we're diversified and multiple, that there's somehow little parts or things in themselves are greater and smaller divinities. And because we experience God truly in his love, that therefore there's a sort of a small God, which is not the complete God there. And this is a mistake. This is not how to understand the activities with diversification. Yes, we experience fully of God, but they're not like a small God, as if they're cut off from God. God is truly present and uniting the activity, even in the diversification, in himself, transcending the activity which we're experiencing. And in a sense, continuing in himself in the infiniteness of activity is only vis-a-vis us that we're experiencing that due to our limits and our time and space. But God continues to act in the infinite thing. So he's not composed of his bits of the diversified things. His bits, they don't exist in the diversified himself state in himself. They only exist in that diversified state and engage in this. But nevertheless, that's truly God we're engaging with in the diversified thing, and he's truly present in there. So this is just basically speaking about this type of thing. That these things, when they're rooted in the nature of God, their activities, then they're not composing him.
Okay. Got one last section here.
This is getting a bit closer to what we're talking about. So, but I would say, in a sense, it's true. The multiplicity of attributes exists only in our concepts. No, it only exists in our relation to God, not just simply our concepts, not just our thinking that exists in our minds. The multiplicity is truly there in our engagement, our relationship to God. They truly exist. God truly loves. God truly creates. God truly is merciful. God truly helps us. God truly forgives. We experience these activities, and it's not just a thing in my head. But diversification is only according to me as a human. They're not diversified in God of himself. And so, yes, they are grounded in the God of himself, but because of their infinite nature, etc., their simplicity, God is all of those things, and he is the thing that he's not sort of possessing something from outside. He is the thing. He is love. He doesn't get given love by something outside of him. There is no composition of this, even though the love is distinct from his patience, and really distinct in a sense, but not separately distinct. Then there is no composition, and this is what we're saying. So it's very similar, but just slightly different understanding of what's going on. And it's the whole concept of the infinite reality in God himself, diversified to us. This is the thing I think people struggle with. They try to think of these concepts as little things in God himself as they are in a diversified form, without actually understanding it in God himself. They become their infinite reality, an infinite way, infinitely united in him. And it's only in his relationship to us, but it's truly him relating to us in his diversification, not as just a created effect from him. So we truly believe in that the God in his infiniteness can limit himself into an engagement and still be himself in that limiting. So there's other way, he's either all or nothing. You can't conceive of an activity which is a limit to us. I think this is where you get conceptual problems. We believe he can diversify and limit himself in his engagement to us while still remaining himself, because in himself he still has the infinite activity continuing. It doesn't limit his infiniteness by engaging us in a limited way at one point. That doesn't impact his infiniteness. Just as I can take something out of an infinite pool of water, take a drop of water out, I'm not limiting the infinite pool of water anymore. It's still an infinite pool of water. So this is about dealing with infinities.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we had for this video.
Right. Well, I hope that made some sort of sense and addressed the points.
Yeah. Did you have any, like summary?
No,
everything we
I
went
think that basically, that always was a good summary, just what I just said there at the end. So, well, I suppose I can say, so we don't teach that the energies are things that are separable and can exist of themselves. So the activities, operations of God, which are inseparable and united completely to the essence of God, who's present in all his activities. What we do believe is that the infinite reality of God, the infinite activity of God, of him himself, can be diversified without limiting God in himself, but nevertheless he is able to, in contact to us, do so in a limited way, which allows us to see distinctions in activities, which allows us to give names to God. But if we go back into himself, we start hitting him as incomprehensible and ineffable, because of the infinite way of the infinite is where our mind is not capable of grasping it as such. And if we do, it comes through prayer, and it's just something God gives us and enables us to do it. Is by his grace that he transformed us to be capable of starting to grasp. But if we are in that way lifted into the third heaven as Paul, we can't express it to other people. It's just something there. And that for us, the essence is to be the thing. That is the core of being the thing, and it is not knowable. By definition, you just can't know it. You can only know something by its activities, which are the things that precisely that relate between you and the other thing. Those are the activities, are the means of relationship, the point of engagement, the point of participation in anything, is it through its activities, not in its essence, because the essence would be just to be it, but then we would cease to be creatures. It would just simply be God, and there'd be no point in creation. And we wouldn't even know anymore that we're experiencing God, because if we just be God, we wouldn't be experiencing God as me. I would just be God. I wouldn't be experiencing God. So I would cease to be me. So I couldn't talk about any experience, because I wouldn't be there anymore. So anyway, I hope that is, so when we speak about distinction, we're not doing it in a sense of real as a separable or realizing stuff. No, we're talking, as I said, much more in the modal sense, or the minor real one, where my sitting in me can be distinguished, or the exclusive sense of my being and my essence and my being and actual reality of where I am or not can be distinguished. That's what the level we're speaking at. I'm not going to limit our definition to any specific form which has been created in Western philosophy, but yes, and just reaffirming it, it's not. He doesn't mention about the Basil is quite different from Thomas. We're talking about actually experiencing the operations of God directly and engaging God directly in his operation, not by some created effect of his. Well, it seems that Aquinas seems to be reducing God's operations to just the created act. He's just simply creating everything. There's no actual operation of God we're experiencing. All we're experiencing is his creation. He just creating things. And we just experience a creature. But we're not experiencing God in that sense. We have no relationship with God. We're just relating to creatures. But that ultimately doesn't bridge the gap between God and creature, which is necessary for creation to exist. Because you can't have two realities sort of that are ununited together and unparticipating in each other. Therefore, God will be limited because he's not in the other thing he's created. Except for some distant creation thing, this is no good. He has to be actually in the thing. It's almost where you're getting closer to a Buddhist idea, but not going there. But you need to be pushing that way. Otherwise, you haven't not properly defining reality because you're limiting God. So it's quite complex, these things. But this is not a minor matter. The essence, energy, and actual participation in God is necessary for reality to be correct, and that we don't collapse into non-existence. Just as we need to participate in the Trinity for reality to exist, we need to become born-again sons of God with the Spirit resting upon us. Otherwise, there would be no possibility of creation, no possibility of anything existing. Only if we exist in the form of in the Trinity, according to as sons of God in the Trinity, participate in the activities of God as infinite activity, can there be actually any reality, created reality? So this is quite important.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, the energies, they're directly rooted in the essence of God, and
they're fully united into the essence of God, just in the same way as he would probably affirm that they're there. So we're not suggesting that they exist anyway as separable from God. Well, it's not when we talk about them being diversified and starting and ending. We're talking about this according to the diversification of the energy, the sort of sense of a limit of God in his participation of us according to his activity that is expressed in a limited sense. But we're not talking about something that exists as a sort of separate thing that's floating around. It's a big mistake. Like that.
Yeah, right. In the essence is something that we absolutely cannot know.
No. There's no way we can participate. As I said, you'd have to be God, literally. And when I say that, you cease to be a creature. So we become God in a sense because of his activities, but I still do so as a creature. I still recognize myself as a creature. And then in the participation, I become God because I'm doing the activities of God. That's what we're talking about when it's in Aquinas talks about God became man, that man became God. We're talking about being God as an activity. It's reigning with God, loving like God, doing, but as not ceasing to be a creature. That would be to participate in the noble essence would be to actually turn into God. Then we'd cease to be a creature. I'd cease to be myself. It would just be God there. It would all vanish. It would just be God. We'd all collapse into God, and there'd be nothing of us left there. But then we wouldn't know it. I'm experiencing God because I'll just be God as if I wasn't there in the first place. So the essence is just totally unattainable to us.
Right. Well, Father, I know you didn't want to stay too late tonight, so
yes, we'll have to call it night there. Oh well, good to talk, and have a good night yourself. And God willing, we'll catch up again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you, Father. Until next time.
All right. Good night.
See you.